Hey, everybody, it's Rick Wilson. Welcome to another live today on Substack. I want to just say how grateful I am today to be joined by Stacey Abrams, who the last time we were together, we sat on an airplane and both of us, I think, were kind of exhausted from two separate trips and didn't talk much, but it was nice to just like sit. And it's great to see you again, Stacey. Listen, I want to jump right in because I know we've got a limited time today. You have a book coming out in July called Coded Justice. In this world where the right and the MAGA movement are trying to demonize everything about race and justice, talk to us about what the book is about and why this is the moment for it.
Thank you. And I want to say you are a great seatmate. You really are. We had just enough conversation to be polite and actually engaged, but not so much that we both were dreading
more talking.
Exactly. But Coded Justice is coming out in July. It is the story of my heroine, Avery Keene. This is her third outing. She has left the Supreme Court. She's now working for a law firm, and she gets brought into a firm, an AI firm that is doing healthcare. And the firm's intention is to try to make certain the algorithm isn't using bias in offering healthcare services to veterans. And so she's supposed to be helping them do this. But there's a dead engineer, and there's a question of whether this is a glitch in the system or whether the system itself is broken. And so she's got to help figure it out. So if you care about AI and want to know more about it in a really fun, exciting way, if you care about the rule of law, and if you're just afraid that some people who are well-intentioned might not have your best interest at heart, come and join Coded Justice.
You know, I think it's interesting that you have written, you've, as a novelist, you're tackling things that are very of the moment, very, very pressing issues in the moment we're in, because there's this enormous, I think, a phase shift going on right now with AI, with technology, with how media is evolving, how social media is evolving, and I think in some ways it's valuable to get that in a storytelling format rather than a news or analytics format.
Well, the very first Avery Keene novel focused on the problem in the Constitution where there's no way to remove a Supreme Court justice except for high crimes, misdemeanors, or death. But the inability to do the job, you couldn't do anything. The second book, Rogue Justice, looks at the FISA court and the fact that we don't really know who sits on it and what they decide, and what happens with our energy grid and just how wobbly that is, but also overarching issues. So for me, writing is about how do you take of the moment issues, make them accessible, let the person dive deep. I try to do things that are improbable, but not impossible, so that we understand what we've got to start demanding of our leaders and learning for ourselves.
Right. I think that's actually a really valuable approach, because and again, you're doing this as in a storytelling format rather than like saying to people, here's the terrible problem we face. Because I do think we've had so many terrible problems in the last decade that a lot of people they switch off when they hear, oh, you're describing something terrible about AI. I'm just afraid I'm not going to listen to it. Yeah. But when you're telling it as a sort of exciting, kinetic story, that really changes the ball game. So, I wanted to ask you also, you've got a new podcast called Assembly Required. Talk to us about that.
Well, it's similar to what you've said. Too often we're doom scrolling, whether it's reading terrible news or hearing people tell us how things are wrong and broken. And the reality is those things are true. But what we crave is knowing what to do with the information. And so I launched Assembly Required to make certain we understood what we were afraid of. So I invite guests on to talk about the big topics. But then I really try to make sure we break it down so that you feel smart when you're telling somebody else about it. And then there's a call to action every single time. So you can't fix the Electoral College, but you can ask for ranked choice voting in your local elections. We can't remake our political party overnight, but you can get involved in local elections and start electing the people who make the party reflect the values you hold. So taking the big constructs and making sure we make them accessible and operational, but that we're doing strategic thinking and strategic doom scrolling as opposed to just the miasma of the world.
That's going to be my excuse from now on. It's strategic doom scrolling. Don't worry. It's the good kind.
There you go.
So, in these conversations you're having with people, who has been the person or what has been the issue that has struck you that's the most salient that you think reflects like the biggest challenge we face or a solution to a big challenge?
I think the two most critical conversations I've had recently, one was with Rachel Maddow, really helping us understand what tyranny and authoritarianism look like today. We have this sort of halcyon understanding of it. We're in the middle of it. We're in the middle of the autocratic. In fact, I would say we're at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock on the doomsday clock. And we have to understand how we got here, which is what she does so effectively. But we also have to talk about what we can do about it. And that conversation was really, really thoughtful. Had a conversation with Senator Cory Booker before he did his 25-hour marathon, really talking about how do we hold our leaders accountable and what should we be demanding of them. And then one of the most fun conversations I got to have was with Tom Colicchio.
Tom.
Yeah. And that one was about the fact that, and he said it as a bit of a throwaway line, but we came back to it. You know, we came close to solving hunger in the United States in the 1960s. Yeah. We know how to solve big problems in this country.
This close.
We know how to do big, hard, gnarly things, but we forget because we have, leaders that tell us that our history isn't real, but we also get overwhelmed by the scale of the problem. And we forget that before we had power, before we had the internet, before we had AI, we had each other. And we can solve those problems if we remember our power that's individual and then collectivized. And then eventually it is governmental power that makes certain that everyone gets to benefit from what we achieve.
It always strikes me that in this century, we have done 4 or 5 of these great works, these amazingly gigantic things in the last 100 years. We got out of the Great Depression. Yes. We defeated Nazism. We opened the door finally on civil rights in a way that started to address the big flaw in our founding. We went to the moon. We defeated Soviet communism. We opened the door to technology that was unimaginable 50 years ago. And all those were big, big, big undertakings, but they took a lot of people doing small things first.
Exactly.
They took a lot of people doing the micro, not the macro. And it just strikes me that, and maybe it's something about our culture now, maybe it's something that we've been so, and I could draw a line, I could say it's from 9/11 forward, where we just have been in this like it's too hard frame. Like it's too hard to do X. It's too hard to deliver healthcare. It's too hard to go back to the moon. It's too hard to, finish the electrical grid in this country. All these things that are not unsolvable. It's partly an attitude that they're unsolvable. I think that's really set us back, to a period where, like in the early going of the Depression, people really believed, I did a lot of reading on this recently, people really believed that was it. It was the end, that America was going to die, that the country would shatter, break apart, and that was it. Somehow FDR turned that ship.
I mean, it's a bit of learned helplessness. As we get more access to technology, as we see more opportunity, we forget how we got to the place of knowing it. And we convince ourselves that it was a blip as opposed to intention. We survived the Civil War. I mean, I was recently reading a treatise on Lincoln and how often he was told that he was going to lose because the North lost battles. Until Ulysses S. Grant figured out how to take Vicksburg, everyone was convinced that the president was wrongheaded and should sue for peace and give the South what they wanted. And the reality was he had patience, he had intention, but he also believed in his knowledge. And I think that's the part that we are losing. And it's actually the most terrifying part to me of the attacks that we're watching happening at the federal level right now. And we've seen it happen at the state level. They are building ignorance into our zeitgeist. They're making ignorance the prototypical necessity by attacking learning, attacking universities, but they're fundamentally attacking knowledge because ignorance is the greatest weapon of authoritarians. And we've got to know that we deserve more.
That's so true. So you are in Georgia, and a lot of folks are looking at a Georgia Republican Party that is now entering what I call its post-Brian Kemp era, where the MAGA strain in Georgia politics and the Republican side is rising. And people have asked if you're going to do it. I'm not asking if you're going to do it. I know you've been talked about. People are speculating. What kind of campaign should the Democrats run in Georgia? Because we know Democrats can win statewide in Georgia. What kind of campaign should the Democrats run this year, especially if it's someone from the Marjorie Taylor Greene edge of the party, which is not impossible?
Well, and I'm going to flag one piece. I appreciate the fact that Governor Kemp did not overturn the 2020 election, but he has done everything else on the MAGA wish list.
Oh, I was getting to that. I was going to loop back around on the education stuff, especially with that. So
exactly. And so because of that, the question is, how loud is the MAGA strain? It's the most virulent and most evident with Marjorie Taylor Greene, but it has infected the entirety of the party.
Sure.
And the reality is we're a purple state. Republicans they now have to fight to hold on to the power they've held for 20 years, but they've got to explain the failures of the past 20 years. Last night I was in Montezuma, Georgia, which is down in Macon County in Southwest Georgia. I know where it is.
Yep.
And we were talking about the fact that they have an educational system that is tied to falling property values because they've decimated how the millage rates work. And this is a state problem. The state has pulled money out. They don't have jobs with an honest wage because the jobs don't come there anymore. And there's been no real intention. Right. And there's no accountability for people who cannot get to a doctor within 50 miles. You and I both know what it means to be 50 miles away from something when you live in a rural community.
100%.
They're not asking for wishes. This is a test. It's a test about why we have local and state government. And so for Democrats to win, we have to have answers to the problems that people should not be expected to solve on their own. And so our job is to prove that democracy can deliver. Democracy must deliver. And that means we got to listen, and then we've got to take action, and we've got to hold Republicans accountable for what they have failed to do for 20 years. But Democrats have to show that we have plans for people's success, not just slogans.
I think that's a really important point, Stacey, is that a lot of voters have heard Democrats over the years, like, I'm going to improve X, I'm going to do Y, here's my policy on how I'm going to do it. But it doesn't feel connected to their real life. Yeah. And you and I both know that, because I live, if you take a left out of the end of my street, you're in Georgia in about 2 minutes. Yeah. You and I both know that folks in the rural parts of the state, which is still, 40+% of the vote in Georgia, do not feel like Democrats speak their language. And I'm not just talking about the culture war stuff. I don't think I think a lot of them are skeptical that Democrats are practical about doing things. I think if Democrats go to them with a plan, we're going to do the following 4 or 5 things in this county, and they're not 30,000 foot, big picture climate change type stuff. They're the small ball stuff. We're going to build a road here. We're going to fix a bridge there. We're going to fund these schools here. I think that could end up being a very powerful, way to return to the dialogue with people that aren't traditional Democratic voters.
Well, I think there's capturing the non-traditional Democratic voters, but there's also the capture of the voters who don't believe they have the right that they should vote. We often attribute non-voting to apathy. It is exhaustion. Yes. When you live in a region that has been overlooked by every party, it's not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's a does government work for me issue. And so far, the answer has been no. And so I think it's more than just saying, here's what we can do. It's explaining why it isn't happening. Last night, when this gentleman was explaining and really bemoaning how hard it is to live in his hometown, I explained, the reason you don't have this is because Georgia refuses to expand Medicaid. Indiana expanded Medicaid.
Right.
Arizona expanded Medicaid. We are paying for other people to have what you need. And so if Georgia were to expand Medicaid, you would have hospitals, which means you can get jobs because no one's bringing a construction job to a place where you can't get to a doctor.
Right. We're the only healthcare is a minute clinic.
Exactly.
They're not doing that.
And so to make that real, we've got to make sure people understand why it isn't happening, and where Democrats, I think, have not done as effective a job as we should. And this is it's what we're facing on a national level. People don't know how government works. They are all for ending regulation until they realize that means someone can pollute your air. Right. And so we've got to do a job right now, making sure people understand whose fault is it and how do you fix it. But it's not enough to say this is bad and they are bad. We've got to say this is how it happened, and this is what we can do to fix it.
Right.
And here's the role that you play as a voter or a non-voter in deciding whether good gets better.
I think that's a really, I think we're all seeking ways for the Democratic Party to get back on its feet, because we need two competing political parties that believe things and will articulate them. But a lot of this, it really is, people have felt like they've been ignored, and it has to get to a boiling point, a crisis point, before they'll take action. I'm going to give you a good example. In Florida, just recently, there was a bill in the Florida legislature to allow oil drilling in North Florida along the Gulf. And the coalition that got built, and I was on the very edges of it, I was supporting it, just social media wise. But I really admired it because it was redneck North Florida panhandle bubbas like my family. It was environmentalists. It was conservationists, which is where I come in. It was progressives, and they all were like, no, we're not letting you do this to us. And while that was felt like a one-off in some ways, now the same coalition's kind of moving along to the point where they're going after other things that are harming people in the state, which I'm kind of blown away by. It makes my heart feel good, because, and I think that's the same kind of thing, because there is an urban-rural coalition in Georgia like there is here. I think there's an absolute window of opportunity in Georgia. All the counties in the donut, there may be a lot of very red people in that northern half of the donut, but they also want their quality of life. They want their kids to have a good education. They don't want to see things collapsing for no reason.
I mean, when I ran in 2018, when President Biden and Warnock and Ossoff ran in 2020, we built that coalition. We added 900,000 Democrats to the rolls, not just registered, but actually people who were registered who hadn't bothered to do anything. Who, I wouldn't say hadn't bothered, that's the wrong phrasing. People who had not seen a reason to vote
felt motivated to.
Felt motivated and believed it was worth it.
Right.
Our opportunity and our challenge is making sure we renew and revive that coalition again and add to the number. And you don't get 900,000 more people showing up only in Metro Atlanta. We built, we won seats in South Georgia. We won seats in areas that weren't supposed to have Democrats. What then didn't happen, though, is people didn't understand that if you don't have a governor who can do these things, that things don't get done. And you and I both live in states of state capture, where the governor and the state legislature decide what everybody can do.
Correct.
And if we don't make certain people understand that the power isn't in DC, it's at home, we will never fix DC.
That is, someone the other day was like, well, how can we fix redistricting? Congress, I'm like, stop. You have to win seats in your state.
Yes.
That's how you fix redistricting. That's how you do redistricting. You have to win legislative seats in your state. And this person was in, I'm just going to say, they were in a red state, but a marginal red state. And it was just like, you don't hope for a fix from Washington.
Yeah.
Go find people in your neighborhood and your city and your county and your state, and you'll find solutions to a lot of this stuff. So, Stacey, I know you have got a limited amount of time today. I appreciate you coming on so much. Listen, we will talk again. If you have any announcements, don't hesitate to let us know. We'll promote them. And thanks again for coming on, and really appreciate you.
Thank you. Well, I will make one announcement now, and that is Assembly Notes is my new addition to Substack. I just joined you there.
Oh,
and
hell yeah,
joined yesterday. And it's one of the places where I want to keep having these conversations. We've got the chance. I love the podcast Assembly Required, but I want to go deeper, put more strategies on paper, share ideas, and help folks like you and me do the best we can, because very quickly, back in 2012, 2013, I was part of what we called the Green Tea Party, where a hyper-conservative and I worked together. So we can make it happen. We just have to believe that we deserve better.
I think that's absolutely right. Well, Stacey Abrams, thank you again for joining us. Folks, we'll be back with more lives next week. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks, Rick.